Yeah, in the end, he decides to live. He gets to fight the fascists. The fascists in that book are really extraordinary. The
Star. What are they called? Starmen or something?
Starmen, right? Lily Star, right? Yeah, they're incredible because they're so completely convincing, and without almost any. I mean, there's no atrocities at all. They don't do any, large-scale horrible things at all. It's just the little things that.
Excuse me, I'm gonna put him to bed. He's too restive. We're putting you into bed, and then Mama can do all. I mean, I can stand away, but see, when he pulls against this, my arm won't move. It's going to take months before I can do this. So at that point, I have to put him down. I literally can't. But I've only been out of surgery for a little while. See, it was in August. They said it'd be a year before I'd have full mobility.
Before you could play golf again.
Before I can pitch my team to victory. Anyway, what were you saying? What was the last question? About the Starman,
Yeah. I mean, they're much more fascist than the people in Follow My Tears, strangely enough. I mean, in a more absolute way.
They're idealized fascists. They're the kind that, if we ever encountered another race and they were fascists, they'd be like that.
Where did you get the Molinari from? I mean, he's kind of like a Churchill or
Mussolini.
I
studied and became convinced that even though I don't agree with Mussolini's ideology, that one of the articles of Italian fascism is that ideology is not important anyway. We generate ideology out of our actual needs. That, Mussolini say that the deed comes first, and then the theory to explain it, why we did it. He was one of the early existentialists. A lot of existentialism comes from Italian fascism, and I think he had a really great thing, and that he saw that our reasons for doing things are not really probably why we do. We don't really know why we act. We have impulses to act, and he said we should go on those impulses. And then later, looking back on what we accomplished, we should reconstruct, theoretical explanations for them. And therefore, I don't have to agree with the theory of fascism, the ideology of fascism, because he himself said all this is just intellectual stuff to account for what I have done. But why I have done what I have done, I don't really know, he said, except that there are in us impulses which we should listen to. And
do you feel he was kind of caught in that situation of having an ally that was worse than the enemy?
Well, that is exactly, extrapolated exactly from his relationship with Germany. Studying a book I read called The Brutal Friendship, his relationship with Hitler, is that Italy had no power in the Axis. No power at all compared to Germany. Nothing. Their military machine just broke down Africa. The doors of their tanks wouldn't even stay shut. And it didn't look like that at the beginning. They had like General Graziani, they had good general. It looked like they had good armor. It looked like they were an equal partner. And then almost overnight, they proved to have no military strength. Everything was badly built. They couldn't cope with anything. And his relative position was transformed. It was really the senior partner since fascism began in Italy. Now, as a human being, he's a fascinating person. He finds himself the architect of an ideology which is supposed to start a 2,000-year reign over all the world, really. And overnight, he's the janitor in the firm. You see, because after all, one of the credentials for being the fascist leader is military strength. Cannons, guns, tanks. And he's got nothing. And he was there only on the sufferance of Hitler. Hitler had a sentimental attitude toward Mussolini. And, Mussolini was in one of the worst positions that a world leader ever got into in the history of the world. in the normal process of the winnowing of the powerful versus the weak, he would just have been lopped off immediately. But he stayed on to Hitler's sufferance. And the tragedy was that Mussolini's appraisals of the situation that faced the Axis were absolutely accurate. They never were the fantastical, delusional things that Hitler got into. Mussolini always understood the situation. He had the ironic opposite of what fascism told you to have. He had the intellectual insight with no physical power, whereas the fascist ideology was intellectual insight is worthless. Power, essentially mosques, the will, is everything. And look how he wound up. The man who was the architect of that, that view of real politics wound up with a tremendous intellectual. He was like a scholar. He wound up like a professor of political science on salary to the Nazis, handing them analyses of the war situation, and Hitler would mark them F- and give them back and not read them. That's really what it amounted to. A brilliant man, powerless, finally deposed by a figurehead group that he set up, the Fascist Grand Council. He said they deposed him. And having those terrible stomach pains that he had because he sensed the incredible
I didn't realize
evils of their world without being able to put his finger. After all, the fascists, the Italians never had the racial thing. They never got into that anti-Semitism. They never did. He didn't really understand what the Nazis were doing. He saw the offspring of his ideology blossom into an area right before his eyes that he couldn't really understand. That was really outside of his range, and I just transferred him as I understood him into the mole, who is the junior partner with people so cold and so efficient and so ruthless.
And he's such a fascinating and sympathetic figure.
Well, in a way, I'm trying to write a cryptic tribute to Mussolini, who originally tried to block the Nazis when they tried to take Austria, moved his tanks up to the Austrian border because he didn't want to see war. He literally didn't want to see all that. And that he capitulated like the mole does again and again because he had no power, but he wanted to stay on because he knew if he was replaced, the worst people would follow. It's probably one of the most unenviable positions you can get into, to understand a situation and have no control like that, Hi, sweetie.